Hi, and welcome to the Thank God for the Beatles podcast. If this is your first time, welcome, and if you are returning, it's great to have you back. I'm Karen, and joining me as co-host is my brother Jeff.
Hi, everyone.
We love the Beatles, we love talking about them, and we guess if you're listening that you probably enjoy talking to your friends and family about their songs, their music, their legacy, everything. So today we are going to be talking about Abbey Road. And when I was a child, when this came out, and even until this day, I'm mesmerized by that cover of them walking across the zebra crossing. And what a way for them to come full circle for the Beatles. It was the last time that they were in the studio together. And despite the acrimony and the fighting about the Apple business and the publishing rights and, renegotiating their royalties, all of these things, and the fight with Alan Klein, that they managed to put, that they had their arguments during these meetings, and then here they're going into the studio and they're putting together this remarkable album. And it's just, it's such an important album for me. It's, I think, probably one of my favorites, that we hope that we can do it justice. I mean, it's overwhelming, the amount of information, but we're just going to talk about what we like and what we find interesting and kind of share. And, at the time frame in 1969, they had a kind of a big break after the Wine album and Hey Jude. And so in January of 1969, they were kind of rehearsing in Twickenham Studios for the Get Back, Let It Be, and it was just not very positive for them. It was challenging. Ultimately, they moved equipment to the Apple building into the basement, and maybe things improved there. But they were testing out a lot of the songs here during that time frame. This album was recorded really in earnest from February to August 1969, and it was released on September 26, 1969. And, the Let It Be was a bit of a mess, but they were coming off the January 30th rooftop performance, which was a tremendous lift for them. And during the time, Paul reached out to George Martin to see if they would produce this album with their songs. And George agreed only if they would be disciplined like they used to do it, basically record like we used to do, because they kind of, they didn't really treat them that well, I think, during the Let It Be sessions. So let's just jump right in to it, and let's just skip, and since there's so much to cover about the songs, Jeff, what are your first impressions about the album, since you were older than me at the time in 1969?
Well, I was 12 when it was released. We had just moved to Maryland in late August of that year, and the album was released in the United States in October, I think the 1st of October. And when I got that record, I too was fascinated by not just the album cover, but the breadth and depth of the record. And I was a big fan of the way the medley was constructed and the sounds that were on it. I'd never heard anything quite like it, and I just loved it from start to finish.
Well, so interesting to look at the cover photo with how they were dressed and how George is dressed with the desert boots and the jeans and the denim shirt. It's just so much to take away. And then we won't get into it with this podcast, but it was a lot of the Paul is dead hoax coming in through, and so looking at this through that lens, and it was such a big deal. In fact, there was imagine the teen beats from the 1960s. There was a special version of a Paul is Dead teen beat, which I still have, and it's all the clues and stuff. But interesting when you read about Abbey Road that John Lennon had originally wanted the Lennon songs on one side and the McCartney songs on another side.
Talk about hubris. That's quite extraordinary, actually. I do think it shows the fragmenting of and the individuation of their personalities. They were already distinct personalities were coming through. I think that John and Paul at that time were not really writing that much together anymore. They were writing individually. And even Ringo said, no, they really weren't writing all that much. They didn't have a whole lot of new material. They had a couple of songs written in India, I think from 1968, and that made it into the sessions. But during those sessions, it was more than just the songs on the record. Of course, there were other material that was being recorded. It was actually a very active and fertile time, with a couple of mishaps in the middle. But that's why it took the length of time it did. I think John had his car accident with Yoko, and wasn't available till July, so he was absent for some sessions, and there was all of that stuff going on. And like you mentioned, the business troubles that were occurring at that time. You mentioned Alan Klein. For those that don't know or don't remember, Alan Klein was brought in as a new manager, and he had previously managed the Rolling Stones, but he was considered, I suppose, a bit shady. I don't want to cast aspersions on the man, but apparently they weren't seeing much of their cash at the time, and hence it inspired a couple of the songs on the record and those troubles. And Paul had vociferously disagreed with the other three to take him on. He just did not trust him, and I think later he found that distrust in Klein was justified. So there was some acrimony over the business. And also Apple, which they constructed, the Beatles were basically terrible businessmen. So, except for Paul, who learned how to handle the business later, but they were terrible businessmen, and Apple was falling apart. And Apple was like a store, a boutique, a welcoming artist, and they were bleeding money terribly. So they were losing a lot of money in Apple, which is a record company also that they helped create. So this is Apple before what we know today.
I think Zapple was the record arm of it. Zapple Records, part of Apple.
Right, and it's still Apple. It was released as Apple. The label was Apple. And so that's before the Apple we know today is product line of computers. Apple back then was the Beatles' own company. But like I said, it was basically a business failure. And that was weighing on them all at the same time. And yet at the same time, you find that they were agreeing with George Martin, yes, let him produce, and they seemed happy to produce it. And he mentioned he felt there was a general feeling that this could probably be towards the end or almost the last record. So it was a feeling of joy in that they were wanting to make this a really, really good album. So they all put the effort into it.
So interesting that you said that, because I have read where George and Ringo said, it wasn't like we were saying in our last take, in our last song here, in our last time together, that was really never present. But it was certainly that they were all working in individual projects. I think that George had released his Wonderwall electronic music album, and was, they were producing other people. So
and Ringo was filming The Magic Christian. He was an actor in a Peter Sellers movie. So there was a time frame when they could stop recording after February until I think April.
Until Ringo came back.
Until Ringo came back. So, they were involved in their own individual projects. They were, like I said, they were becoming more individuals. And
John and Yoko were coming into their own as
a couple.
As a couple and spokespersons, and doing big things for peace and for life.
I think John just basically had other ambitions and wanted to change direction. And I think that there was a sense of that. And the person holding the Beatles' aura and mythology together was Paul, basically, and George Martin. I think intuitively he might have recognized that, but they did not know it was going to be the last record. But I think there was a general feeling that it was going to be one of the last or coming to an end. So I think that they really gave their all on this record, and it really shows in the quality of the recording. And not to mention that it's also the very first 8-track. The Beatles have been working with 2 tracks and 4 tracks. And
it was a solid state. It was a new recording technology. I was just listening yesterday to Sirius radio, and Paul McCartney was going through the 50th, I think, release of RAM. So he was going through each thing, and he was talking about, because the guy interviewing him was saying how much he preferred the mono version of RAM. And so Paul's like, well, I never really thought about it, because he did share this anecdote that when they went to Abbey Road to do the Abbey Road album, that, they were used to seeing one speaker on the wall, and now there were 2 speakers, and Paul said, we said it's going to be louder. And it's like, nope, it's the separation of the stereo. And it was like, okay.
Well, Paul thought that, it was a bit excessive to 8 tracks. They were so used to being reserved and controlling in the way they worked with the previous technology that it was a little jarring for them. I thought, oh man, that might be a bit much, but it is the first true stereo album that had no mono mix. So
No, Octopus's Garden had a mono mix.
Oh, it did?
I believe it did.
I never heard that. But, I mean, as an album, I believe it was, and then it's also the first, when you hear the drum solo that Ringo plays, that he didn't want to play, but he ended up playing. The drums were mic'd, and the tom-toms, he had new cabs put in so that he loved the sound. So basically, the focus was an engineering feat. It was amazing. I mean,
well, they continue. I mean, listen, they were leading the way with new technology and recording technology for years, and here they continue it. And on this album, Jeffrey and I, we don't know really how to say, is it Moog or Moog? The Moog synthesizer.
I call it Moog, but
was created by a guy in California, and George got one, and it's like an octopus with 1,000 plugs and all these things, and that they didn't really know how to...
And George said it would take 1,000, you'd probably have a 1,000-page manual if you had to figure it out. And amazing how they actually took that instrument and each of them...
incorporated it well.
And used it, right. They figured it out for their own purposes and for their own songs. It was just another tool in the toolbox. And it's
But not afraid to do that and to step outside of where, everyone else is doing. It's like, yeah, we're gonna try this. And at that time in 1969, Led Zeppelin had their album come out, and it was the heavy metal stuff, and then the progressive rock was coming out with all the future, like, kind of wild drumming. I think it was I don't know about Cream. They might have been downshifting with Eric Clapton and their history, but so there was a lot going on in the music industry, plus Hendrix. So, and here the Beatles are coming with this very well produced, almost a glossy album. Mm-hmm. And we were just talking about this off the podcast, but the initial reviews were not very favorable to this album. They were very mixed because people felt it wasn't very authentic.
Authentic meaning because you put a synthesizer on it is not authentic. I'm sorry.
Or overly produced, because when you hear something like Because, or even the whole second side, which to me is a masterpiece. It's one of the few second sides of an album that I listen all the way through. Mm-hmm. I enjoy every minute of it. There's nothing that I would cut out.
Right.
And it's a shame. It was a shame because ultimately I think it became one of their most top-selling...
Well, later I think the critics had changed their mind about it. But
yes.
They weren't used to I think the technology had changed, and therefore there was more space open to them to actually produce a second side suite. And so in that second side suite, it was brilliantly put together. And of course you had to add some production and tricks and gloss on it to pull that off. It's just like pulling together an opera or anything else that has a grand scale to it. And if critics object to that, well, that's just a matter of their taste. And even, of course, we hate to mention that John himself was not a big fan of the second side.
I call John Wet Blanket Lennon.
John.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. I hate to say it, and I love John, but what a pain in the ass.
Yeah, he was. I mean,
what a pain in the ass to come back in 1980, and he's like pissing all over it. It's all these unfinished bits that we put together, and it's just,
it's just bits of crap, that we wrote and put together. Junk,
And he referred to Mean Mr. Mustard as junk, and I love...
Well, maybe he thinks they're junk, but actually... if you listen to the demo from the anthology of Mean Mr. Mustard and you hear his chorus, it's good, except when he gets to that chorus, it's not that great. So he didn't really had finished it. Well, sorry, John, you didn't finish those songs, but you had them lying around, and Paul must have thought they were good enough to put on the record, and he thought that they were. He gave them a lift by constructing this medley and having Sun King. John's contributions being Sun King and Me, Mr. Mustard, and Polythene Pam, right? And turn them into something, and they rock, and they fit. And even though he says they're loose, well, of course they're not really totally related to each other. They weren't intended or written that way. But he took it and made something of it. Another, Paul did not let those bits, as you might call them, go to waste. So I say, so what? It's a great production. It's a great piece, and John did in earnest, although he, objects to it later or knocked it later. He did contribute and work on it, and did put in his harmonies, and and his guitar parts, and he did earnestly work on it, out of respect, I suppose, for George Martin. But
I was reading, I think it's called The Beatles at the End by Ken McNabb, if I'm remembering correctly.
yeah,
And it really goes into all the drama of the business problems that they had.
sure.
And so it's tough to follow. I mean, you need like a spreadsheet to keep track of everything and the dynamics between the Eastmans wanting to represent and help the Beatles, and then the three other guys saying, we don't want your in-laws involved. It was a lot of that. I forgot my point.
Well, all I'm going to say about that point is that George. Well, I'm going to say that George Martin also mentioned. Well, John is a bit of a teddy boy. He's a rock and roller to the end. He wanted the songs separate. He liked that. That's why he liked that first side. And
Well, I know what I was going to say was that at the time, with the business matters, I think that their money was frozen. And John even though he could be a wet blanket, he was pragmatic, and it was like I think that they knew that they needed money and they needed to write some songs. And to generate income.
Sure.
So it was, apparently John was enthusiastic about doing this album, and was excited to do it. And if you look at some of the...
Well, I Want You was one of the earlier sessions, and that's his blues number, basically.
And George had said that John was only interested in 12-bar blues.
I don't think that's not true. I mean, John, what is Sun King? That's not 10-bar blues. John wrote all kinds of songs.
That was written like in
right after Maharishi. They went to India, so there's a few songs written back then, and then the stuff written for the record. But that being said, there was great camaraderie and discipline in the actual recording process of the record. So whatever John might have said later, casting aspersions on the album, I think secretly he admired it. I think he really liked the album. He said it was competent. His opinion, he said, it's a competent album, much like Rubber Soul, but it didn't. It lacked something. I thought it had a lot of passion in it.
I would be very curious. Wouldn't it be interesting to go back in time and to say to the Beatles, just take 18 months off, do your own projects, and then come back?
Mm-hmm. But that wasn't allowed back then. When you're a Beatle, they didn't think that they could get away with doing that. A lot of bands do that nowadays.
Yes, but imagine if they had done that.
But
I also maybe Yoko didn't want that.
They were already doing this.
Yoko wanted her own platform with John.
Well, Paul was not making solo records, until he made his first one. The rest of them were already doing their own projects.
But he was working on his songs, and I think he held back. I think he had Every Night, or did he write that after the end of this? But he started to hold
George
back some
also,
of his songs.
during those sessions, during the Get Back, Let It Be sessions, he wrote All Things Must Pass. So there's a demo of that made.
And they
during
weren't
that
very
time
they
frame.
weren't very supportive of him
Not
during
at
that
all.
for that song, and they of course were just treating him like the little pesty younger brother. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a shame, and it's a shame because apparently one of the few times I think John tried to help George was during the Let It Be sessions, and George was working on something, and so they were trying to work through how to get to a stop or lyrics or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. I think when you hear from the very first opening of Come Together, and you hear that bass line, that hook, that fantastic bass line.
It's the drums too.
And the drums and bass, it kind of foretells that something fascinating in almost is coming. And you hear the first line here, come on, flat top. Okay, all right. Borrowed from Chuck, we give him credit. And yes, Morris Levy won the lawsuit and he got his way. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I think it's a great track from start to finish. It's a great vocal. The lyrics are playful and fun, and they don't have to make literal sense.
But they were saying it was almost making fun of the pseudo hippies, kind of like all this guru crap that was happening in the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, which actually John was probably a part of that as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, but you think about that. It was originally intended, I think the beginnings of Come Together was called Let's Get It Together, which was written for guess who? Dr. Timothy Leary, LSD guru.
No, it was Come Together Joint let's come together and join the party or something like that.
Right. It was, and that was an ill-fated attempt, and then that didn't work. So John pulled that out and modified it and turned it. And even Paul warned him, you don't want to change that line or something. It's a little too close to "You Can't Catch Me." But oh well. But he did it anyway, and it just turned out great. I love the drums, the bass, John's vocal on it. It comes out, and I like the lines, the lyrics to it.
He sings it really well, and John says, "I sang that well. You can dance to it." It's
slow rock. John was really good at that.
Something that you hear,
yeah,
and you immediately, it can only be the Beatles. I mean, I've heard other good covers of it, but you just can't replicate the way that Paul put in that bass and the way that Ringo is playing the drums and how they were recorded, and the singing that John did was fantastic.
And Paul doing a lower harmony, which is a bit unusual too.
Yes.
For Paul. So
yes.
Great stuff. I can't say anything more about Come Together. And then of course it was released as a single, a double A-side with Something, which follows. And Something, I think McCartney thinks that was George's finest tune, and John, of course, agreed with that, and it was originally going to be given to Joe Cocker, I believe,
or Jackie Lomax.
Yeah. Paul said it's George's best song, and if you listen to the Beatles' 50th anniversary of Abbey Road, you hear in the demo John on piano playing a piano backing, which was mostly in the final version edited out, but you hear it in a refrain going dum, 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 a descending line. You hear some piano on it, but it was mostly out of the mix. But you can tell how much the others really loved this track and gave their best for it. And you also mentioned, we were talking about this earlier today, about the bass line, the complex, beautiful, melodic bass line on that song that Paul played.
Well, and George wanted something simple, as Jeff Emmerich tells the story, and he said that Paul did that, but I don't know really. I've read a article about something like in a bass player magazine where Paul was saying I really had to fight to keep that bass line in there because George felt it was too busy, but it adds so much to that song. It's contrapuntal. I mean, it's just phenomenal, and the little bass, I mean, it's just so memorable, and it adds so much, it's just beautiful layering underneath. And again,
it's a beautiful,
talking about nipping a little thing, I mean,
right, but it's a
from
beautiful
James
counterpoint.
Taylor saying Something in the Way She Moves, that's the start of a James Taylor song, and James Taylor was a new sign to Apple,
right?
Young guy, and here George is like, do you mind if I use that? And I'm like, what are you going to say to a Beatle? You're not going to say no.
Yeah, he lifted the line.
He had to say yes. It's
and Something in the Way She Moves by James Taylor is a very fine song. I love James. That being said, that's the line that he took, but everything else is pure George. He took it and made something beautiful with it, and it became the first Beatles' #1 song and the first one that was not written by Lennon and McCartney, and also resulted in a video that was of the Beatles and their wives, created by Neil Aspinall. Wonderful stuff. I can't say more. And the vocals on it, you can hear how Paul added great harmonies on that.
Incredible.
The harmonies on it.
The strings, I mean, the arrangement by George Martin, and, Frank Sinatra wanted it. I don't think that George was that keen at the time, and later on he said, "Oh, I kind of dig that he did like it. It just, that wasn't my generation of music." The Frank Sinatra, he was thinking more of Ray Charles, and George's first wife, Pattie Boyd, had said, "Oh, I think I inspired that," and George kind of later on said, "No, it was just really I wanted to do a Ray Charles thing." So,
well, maybe he's just trying to diss because his wife, he split with his wife, so
yeah,
who knows why he said those.
He didn't say
but
that.
he did give also, but Joe Cocker did record a version of it. I think in that
wasn't released until after.
Right, not until after theirs, but out of respect. But an amazing track. I never tire of it to this day. And anything else to say about that? But
that Paul still does it in concert on ukulele as a tribute. to George.
Because George loved to play ukulele.
It was just it's just an amazing song. And I think that George has said that it just kind of, a lot like Yesterday, it came to him and he's like, did somebody else write this? Is there another song that's like something? Or, that sometimes this greatness just comes to you.
The part that's during George's guitar solo on that album, on the original demo, he was singing a whole nother set of lines, and thank God
they took it out.
They took that out because I need it all the time, and he was singing all that.
Terrible.
I'm like, no, George, that's a little much. It's the Pisces, the extreme, in him. Okay, we get the message, so they took that out, but that's why it helps to have people around you who can help you edit your work, and thankfully, it came out the way it did. And that's followed by what the other Beatles termed as granny music. And, John and even Ringo, they acknowledged that's just granny music. And
they hated it. Maxwell Silver Hammer.
Maxwell Silver Hammer. Now, I really liked this song a lot when I first heard it when I was 12. And so between the ages of 12 and 14, I really liked it a lot because it was kind of funny. And the lyrics... But how much can you like a song, and how much of a granny song can it be when your lyrics are about a sociopathic, serial killer who goes around and hits people on the head with a hammer and kills them? I mean, that's what that song is. So it's really not a children's song. It doesn't get away with that.
And Paul had written some of it in India. It was like from his India composition book with all his lyrics, and he had seen or listened to, I think, an absurdist play. Maybe I think he went to it. It was called
Ubu Ram.
Ubu.
Well, guess
Coco.
what? I'm a theater major here. So basically, written by Albert Jarry, I think 1901 was the turn of the previous century, and he was basically an anarchist, an absurdist, and Ubu was a stupid king. And pataphysical is like a made up science. Okay, so study is not a real science. So study pataphysical science. So you can it's
which
kind
is a lyric in the song.
It's Paul alluding to his cultural hipness and knowledge of the theater, because why he was dating a theatrical actress. He was interested in absurdism, surrealism, everything. So he was taking all of that in, and he threw that song in there. Now nowadays, my feeling about that song, I think of it as kind of a
filler.
A filler piece, right? Well, not just filler. I think it would have made a great B-side. And I'm going to say something controversial here, and I know I'm probably going to get some blowback on this, but if I were producing the record now, instead of following something with Maxwell Silverhammer, I would have put in George Harrison's Old Brown Shoe.
Or put Oh Darling and then Old Brown Shoe.
Or one of those, right? Maybe not in that order, but that would have filled it. I think George was writing such great songs at that very period, coming of his own. And Old Brown Shoe is a heavy rocker. It's got great drive and rhythm and great guitar playing, and on the recording at least, a very good vocal. And it just jams. And you rarely hear George even doing that at all in his solo period. It was... nothing that heavy. And I thought, what a great rock and roll track. Why didn't they include that on the first side? If I were organizing the record, I would have definitely put that in there and then made a Maxwell Silverhammer a B-side or an extra, track for later. Paul desperately wanted a single there. And also, as part of the session...
John Lennon said that'll never be a single. Never.
Sorry, never. I mean,
and that
they hated it.
They did it for like 3 days, and that... John and Ringo are like, it was like forever.
They worked it. Well, George saying they worked it to death. But
it really wasn't true, because they went back in the records and they looked, and it was only like Paul said. It was only 3 days. We did 150 takes on some of your stuff from the White Album, so it was really maybe a little unfair.
Right.
I think it was just Paul being, as John said, being the perfectionist that he is, and just as a fun note.
They just hated the song. They didn't really like the song. And George and John didn't really like the song. And Ringo was more forgiving, saying, well, I guess it is kind of granny music, but I guess you needed that to help sell the album.
In January of '69, they did it during the Apple basement sessions, and Mal Evans did the Anvil. But in the studio session,
on video,
they had to rent a theatrical from a theatrical company, an Anvil, and Ringo did it. So there's that. And so then we get
Mal Evans is their road manager, who was a big hefty guy, and Anvil was obviously heavy, so That's why he did it initially. But no, they say they credit Ringo on there playing the anvil.
And we have "Oh Darlin'," which is to me absolutely one of my most favorite songs.
Most favorite.
Ever. I love it.
Your most favorite. I thought that they did a couple versions of that. I think they actually started that during the Get Back or Let It Be sessions. They began on that. And you hear on the anthology, John singing lower harmony to it, which I thought was pretty cool. And I kind of like that version. And then
it's a falsetto, and there's all kind of different ways.
Right. I mean, Paul's experimenting with that. And John at the end is singing, Yoko got a divorce and I'm free. And he makes up his whole verse about that, and they all sing along with him, to encourage him. And Paul was actually thinking, okay, to get the sound he wanted to sound like he was tired, singing a lot, and sound hoarse. And he sang,
when you wake up in the morning when you haven't said anything, your voice is in that special place.
But
and that's what he wanted.
My point is, he spent he would come in there early and do like one take a day.
That was it until he could get it right.
He would do one take per day of the song until he could get it right. I mean that's dedication to get the sound that he wanted, and that was an incredible vocal. Then he could still tear his voice and have a voice left over. I just can't imagine. There
is an alternate take on that I think I've seen on YouTube. I don't know if it's on any of the albums or the re-releases, and I really like that one too, but I think the album is the best. George played bass on that, and of course, what did John say? Paul did a fine job, but I should have sang that.
He should have given that one to me. He should have sang that. Well, John loved the song, and he thought he could sing it.
He played piano.
He said it's more my style. John said that song is more my style than Paul's. Well, I guess Paul proved him wrong there, but I think John probably could have done his own version, and I thought it would have been interesting at least to have some kind of recording or demo of John doing the song himself.
I think there is one of him singing.
It's got to be.
There's something maybe on YouTube. We'll have to Google that.
I'd love to hear that. I'd love to hear that. Just John, okay, put up or shut up. I'd like to hear you. I would have liked to hear you do the song too, so to hear who does it better. But nah, never mind. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's just got that. It's so bluesy and a straightforward track. One of the shining moment on that record, a highlight for me. And
tell us now, Jeffrey. Tell us. I mean, "Oh Darling" is just amazing.
Yeah, it is.
It's just a great song.
I mean, I've never heard a record like that.
And all that. I mean,
the piano on it, everything, and the Ringo's drumming. I mean, those calves. He was playing those toms. He had those drums.
Some of the best drumming ever.
His best drumming ever on this record. Absolutely.
Well, tell us about Ringo's song that he brought, Octopus's Garden.
Octopus's Garden. Yes, I'd like to be. Ringo was on a trip, I think, with Peter Sellers to Sardinia, and they saw and they explained to him what an octopus and octopus's garden.
A captain of the yacht or something.
Right, and they told him about a real octopus's garden. So he was fascinated and thought, well, that's cool.
What they were saying is that an octopus takes shiny stones or bottles or cans and puts it in front of their cave. Now, I have to say, reading that, I wonder if that captain was just shining him on.
I don't know.
Him a little bit
I don't know.
Is he gullible? Is that really? I'm going to have to Google that. Is that true?
I'm not going to comment on that, but Ringo's inspiration is what matters here. And he went in and showed it to George. And
you can see it in the some of the Let It Be footage, I think.
And the Let It Be footage, right? You could see that they're sitting there. It would be nice, paradise. They're making up different lyrics. And George is working it out with him. They're both sitting at the piano. And it was the second song and the last one that was credited to Ringo writing it exclusively. However, it's obvious that George was helping him with the melodic structure of the song. And visibly in some parts, it's also not just in that film, but also other parts of the demos, where he was assisting him with the structure of the song, and that's fine because he and Ringo and George collaborated solo later on 3 other tracks, including "Back Off Boogaloo" and "Photograph" and "Don't Come Easy," which are co-written as Harrison Starr. So I thought that was a fun little track. It is definitely like a children's fantasy song.
And the use of the Leslie speaker.
Right.
And their vocals to get that underwater sound.
Yeah, that was great. I mean, they went for the camp here, and they had a sense of humor, and they threw that in. They used the background vocals are great. I think you can sense a kind of happy camaraderie on the song. So it's a happy song. Do I listen to it all the time? No.
No, I don't either. But I think that George in later years said that, it's actually kind of a cosmic song, that Ringo doesn't really recognize that some of the lyrics in it are very deep. They may not have been coming to him that way, but if you, think about what he was saying.
He's talking about what an ideal world would be in that form. So
my notes do tell me that it's the only song mixed in mono. Interesting.
I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was a good song. And by the way, our music teacher at my high school where I worked took this and song and had kids with limiting abilities learn the song. They loved it and they sang it, and we got on stage and did it with them. So there's a legacy there. So it has its purpose. And I think the kids deserve a song on a record too. So, but doesn't mean I'm going to play it all the time, but I like it. It's good for a Ringo song. And then followed by I Want You. She's so heavy. So that's
what a way to close the first side. I love
it.
I love this song. I love the passion. I love, even though they say it's so repetitive, he just says the same thing over and over. But it's like he said, like when you're something drowning or whatever, it's like
John is singing to Yoko. That's pretty plain. Of
course it is.
But of course, it's all plain. He's doing that. He's driving me mad, and it is repetitive. But look at what it does musically. It doesn't just go straight. It's not straight blues.
No,
it's
it goes
bluesy.
into a Latina fix, and then
with the line,
Billy
the bass
Preston's
line.
amazing Hammond organ, and Paul's bass playing again is totally wicked.
Wicked bass
strong,
line.
sexy.
Yep.
It's just an amazing song, and Paul and George Martin were not thrilled about the white noise, which was generated by the Moog synthesizer.
Right.
Of having that in there.
Right.
And they were not keen on, what John instructed was, I want you to cut that tape. Cut it.
They were going to fade it. It was going to stop. The tape was actually going to end like 20 seconds after that cutoff. So the engineer John said, no,
adamant, cut it. And so that finality of it is, it's again, taking the risk and keeping what they want to, of staying true to what they wanted.
It's brilliant, actually.
Yes.
I think that John was right to insist on keeping the white noise in the sound, because you think about the tone of it, the passion of it, and there's a bit of an ominous feel to it as well.
Yes.
Towards the end, and I think that
it's the intensity. It's the almost obsessiveness of it.
And you can feel it. That's John's emotions coming out. It has its conflict. It's part gentle and then part longing and then just part obsessive, and that track just represents all those elements. And then that white noise. At first, when I heard it, my first impression was, come on, let's get this over with. I didn't, that it was getting a little to me.
Yes.
But then if you're sitting down and you're open, you just open yourself to it, and you hear it and plays all the way through, and it pulls you in. Like the white noise just pulls you in, like you're on a jet plane or you're going somewhere, and then suddenly it cuts off. And it's in that cutoff.
It reminds me of the end of the TV series in the U.S. called Lost, where it's that last second of the finale when the main character, I think when his eyes either open or close, I can't remember. It's been so many years, but it was like that. So I love the song. I always listen to the bass. I listen to the bass. There's an isolated bass version on YouTube.
And by the way,
it's a little sloppy, but it's still awesome.
By the way, it's actually two different versions combined.
A composite edit.
It's a composite edited, mixed and edited on August 20th. But it started way back in February. So a lot of attention was put into the editing of the track. And I'm sure later they recognized, leave the white noise in. Sometimes John's instinct was right on. At least for that track, it was, and followed by, and then when we in the
Before we
days
get
of
to that,
vinyl.
what's interesting is with the John and Yoko, they had their car accident. They got banged up. They had to get stitches. And so John had a hospital bed brought in. And Yoko would be laying there. And there are pictures of Yoko in the bed. And I think Linda's kind of hanging out too. And the other wives are there. So that was a continuation of him bringing her in. But it was always present. Mm-hmm. Always present. So then we've got leading off a ray of sunshine after that obsessive, I would call it plutonian energy.
Okay, plutonian.
I want you here.
Okay,
plutonian. Here Comes the Sun, another gem from George.
Yeah, George, and oddly enough, that was not released as a single, but then became one of the most talked about and played and duplicated tracks.
And covered songs
ever. And it was written in the midst of a break between all the business disagreements and the accountants and stuff. And George Harrison was in Eric Clapton's garden and thinking, and the weather had been cold and oppressive. And now sun's coming out in England. So it was a break. And so that's why he wrote, that's what inspired
and Eric
George
Clapton
to write
had said it was unusual. He goes, I would never be in my garden. And here's George, let's take our guitars out to the garden. So they just started writing it. I mean, it's such a beautiful, and I think he plays it in D, like on this capoed up 7 frets, and similar, I think, to I Need You, perhaps. I'm not sure. I don't recall. Or one of the other earlier songs, but it's an amazing song.
And there was
everything.
And there was actually a guitar solo in the middle of one of those little slide things. And later on, in Living in the Material World,
that was a special.
The video,
Martin
the special,
Scorsese.
the George Martin special. You see Danny, and you see a visual of Danny Harrison and George Martin playing that back, and they bring it up in the mix. So they just took it out of the mix. There was a little solo there, but it was a little too much, so they took it out. But then I heard the bit. I had to actually go to YouTube to go find it and listen to it because I don't remember hearing it. And then went, oh, yeah, there's that little bit there, but they took it out. And also, guys, this is when I think John was recuperating. I'm not sure.
I don't think John was on it at all.
John was not at the set. That was a new factoid to me that totally surprised me that John was not on it. It just has 3 of the Beatles on it.
The Beatles.
The Beatles, right. And you've got George and Paul doing all those fantastic harmonies on the song. I thought that they work well together, I think, musically.
The guitar work is exquisite. And he's playing a Gibson J200, the beautiful, big, bellowing guitar. And everything is, I would say, it's just tasteful, the work that he does. And it just goes to show you that you don't have to be a shredder or that you don't have to be, all these skilled virtuosos, that you have to make the song work.
It's intricate.
And it is delightful.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's very uplifting and a great start and a contrast, of course, to the ending of the first side. And that's followed by the iconic, incredible song, probably one of my favorite Beatles vocals ever, is Because. And Because...
it's a John song.
It's a John song.
A John and Yoko song, really.
Well, yeah, it's more of a... And yeah, let's talk about this. It's a John... It really is kind of a John and Yoko song because Yoko was playing piano. She's playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And John thought, wait a minute, can you try to play those chords backwards? And from there, he constructed the song. And I believe that some of the lines you were saying to me earlier...
What McCartney had said, I think in his... many years
from now, right?
The biography by his friend Miles is that he was saying that he felt that some of those lyrics could have come from Yoko because it was very much along the lines of grapefruit, see the sky, be the sky, whatever it was.
Because the world is round and turns me on.
Yeah.
But either way, regardless of the source, I think that if it is a John and Yoko song, it's a gorgeous song. And
the time spent that they put into that song to get it just right, and how challenging and complex the harmony was, and how they essentially recorded, I think, the harmonies in 3 different ways to get a layering of 9.
It was triple tracked.
9.
The harmonies were triple tracked, so to make them really lush. George Harrison played the Moog synthesizer on it, womp, 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 womp. He's playing
And
that
beautiful.
part and played it perfectly.
Yeah.
And he loved it, obviously. And George Martin opened it and played the
Electric
harpsichord.
harpsichord, and then Paul later bought that one.
Yeah.
Bought that harpsichord.
And that's a great sound. I mean, of course, George Martin is a consummate musician. People forget that he's not just a producer. And he must have loved that song. And it's ethereal to me. It was covered, I think, by a couple other people, including the late Jerry Rafferty did a beautiful version himself. I mean, who could resist that? You had to be a really good singer to pull it off. And they showed they all were trying to, and George Harrison said, well, we were all trying to be singers then. We were all being singers then. So it was the embellishment. He talked about the embellishment. He was praising the idea of the production, at least on all those tracks.
It was amazing. And even the one on the Love version, I think that's with the Byrds, and it's a cappella. Is that the case?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Beautiful. Even without any other instrumentation, just the vocal, it stands on its own.
Yeah, when they released it for the Love compilation from the Vegas show, with just those vocals. I mean, you could listen to just that. So I think it's extremely powerful. And thank you, Beethoven, for the inspiration. And thank you, Yoko, for whatever contribution you made. I'm sure you should have gotten credit on that as well. And then we move on to the beginning of the actual medley, although it actually does begin as a song, which was You Never Give Me Your Money. And here, I think some critics talked about this whole section as being about different types of love, one being self-gratification, and then coming out to a more spiritual love at the end. And You Never Give Me Your Money was, of course, in reference, at least Paul would say so, although that's
all the drama and the anger at the business side of the Beatles.
Well, the anger at the business side that you give me your funny paper, meaning Harrison would explain, yeah, they were giving us these statements saying I had money here and money there, but no actual money. Well, where's the actual shillings and pence, what you're actually paid in? Yeah, we had the house and the car, but what about that? In the middle of negotiations, you break down. And then
he's got the out of college. You've got that part, the out of college, and then you've got the One Sweet Dream, which is like the freedom that Paul probably felt being married to Linda, where they would just get in the car and go get lost, and that was how they were living their life. But it is, it's just, I would say it's ballsy. I mean, it's that, and then similar sometimes to me to She Came In Through the Bathroom Window.
I love the vocal on it. Paul did
how he sings it is great.
How he sings it, when you think that phrase, out of college, money spent, see no future, pay no rent. All the money's gone, nowhere to go. Any jobber got the sack. What a great line.
But even on his lyrics, nowhere to go, he crossed out the K. It was KNOW, which could be construed as I know where to go, but he crossed out that K and wrote nowhere to go. Or that was the final lyric. So very interesting. It's a great lyric.
Right. And I think that the bits of honky tonk piano that was on it, I think in the 50th anniversary, some of that was buried in the mix. Like, where is it? I'm sorry, Giles. Martin.
The super deluxe version.
Yeah, I didn't like the
2019.
I kind of missed that part, but everything else about it. And what's interesting is towards the end, you're hearing the refrains at the end of that track. Is John Lennon was playing guitar solos on it at the end. So I don't want to sing it on here, but you guys know what I'm talking about if you know the song. So their contributions, how they switched their instruments around.
And I love on the one of the earlier takes on the Super Deluxe version, where Paul is kind of scatting in the beginning. He's like, "You never give me your money," and then he's like, something sandwich. I mean, he's just saying like the most silly things, and I'm like, oh. I just love it when he does that. I think he's doing this.
Oh yeah, he was trying to do a real bassy kind of voice, and I forgot what he was saying at the beginning, and they left that in there, and I thought, what's he doing there?
You know what? They have such a great sense of humor. They're always laughing and joking and that's
they're playing
the beauty
it up.
of them.
Yeah,
They're playful.
They're just being goofballs, I guess. They're just enjoying themselves, and that's great. And then that follows. It calms down after the drama of You Never Give Me Your Money, because it has multiple parts in it, multiple bits, you might say, put together as a song, followed by John's Sun King.
Which he refers to That was a piece of garbage I had.
A piece of garbage? I don't think so. Now, if he thought that was a piece of garbage, but I actually thought that was the beginning of what could have been if he developed it more, maybe another complete song. But who cares? I mean, it's a good bit. And they, again, duplicated the harmonies on that and doing it in triple. And I thought it was great.
They made up the language, which was very, again, playful, clever, right up John's alley with the wordplay.
Mundo paparazzi, mi amore, pe felice, carafon. I mean, I remember I was, as a kid, I was listening to this stuff and memorizing it because I know this isn't a real language, but this is hysterically funny. It's great. There's sense of humor put in there, and then there slips, and the only transition between that and the rest of it and Mean Mr. Mustard is just Ringo's little drum riff that mean and goes into Mean Mr. Mustard. So that part of the medley, those three in a row, Sun King, Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam, those are all John's bits.
The guitar intro for Sun King was inspired by the early Fleetwood Mac, not the Fleetwood Mac that we know now with Lindsay and Stevie.
Peter Green, but
it was that period. Ethereal guitar work that they did. I think it was a song called Albatross or something that inspired them to do that.
It's very, it sounds like you're floating. It's kind of got that feel to it. And you hear some of the sound effects too. It sounds like you're hearing in the background, you're hearing like you're in a yard, you're hearing bugs or bees or something.
Yes.
Right. You hear some of that effect was introduced into it. So another little slow piece with a comical ending, transitioning to Mean Mr. Mustard with that fuzz. I don't know if that is that the Moog doing that. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
That part. Sleeps in a hole in the road.
And there's in the Super Deluxe book that came with the 50th anniversary, shows a copy of the newspaper article about this miserly man whose wife left him, who shaved, turned off the lights and shaved in the dark. I mean, all the things that, John, again, is so skilled at taking the articles from the paper and putting them into a song and, keeping a 10-pound note up his nose. And
I thought they were great lines.
It was clever, very clever.
I thought they were very clever lines and good lines. He thought it was trash, but I thought it really kind of rocked, I thought. And what really makes it is the production. You hear, Paul's great harmonies on it, Mean Old Man, the refrains on it. So you have a series of refrains and maybe partial songs, but they knew that they were bits and partial songs.
John's assessment was bits of crap.
Bits of crap. Well, you know what? His idea of bits of crap, well, John, I think it was good crap, It was really good stuff, John. I thought that you took something that might have been crap if you just left it sit there as a demo, but you turned it into something that was listenable and fun and showed some your personality, and then bangs right into Polythene Pam with just a 3 jing, 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 very simple. It kind of Polythene Pam reminds me a little bit of Love Is Real, Not Fade Away, kind of like that Bo Diddley thing. It's got that kind of feel, that rock and roll feel.
Well, in the original one, they had slotted Her Majesty in between Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam, but when they listened to it,
they hated it.
It didn't sound right.
Didn't fit.
And took it out and cut it, and they ended up cutting, I think, off some of the guitar. Like when you hear Her Majesty, you hear the crashing part of Mean Mr. Mustard.
Oh, that's where the ending of Mean Mr. Mustard was cut off, folks, and so that's part of the story. So then
These
you just
random
hear the
accidents, which are fantastic,
great accidents, because then you have just the acoustic heavy guitar on Polythene Pam, and
Polythene Pam. I
sister,
love it.
It used to be
attractively built.
Yeah, the only ties the songs together is sort of. And Me, Mr. Mustard said, "It's say she was attractively built," and on the anthology he repeats it. Say she was attractively built. He must have liked that line. But thinking of someone, I'm probably Bridget Bardot. But anyway, talking about Shirley instead of Pam. So he changed, I think, Shirley.
They changed it to have more cohesiveness.
On purpose,
yes.
Right? For Polythene
Sister
Pam.
Shirley. Sister Shirley. Yeah. So they changed that, but it's also alluding. John has spoken that it was alluding to like a kind of a kinky thing back from 1963, where this poet or beat poet that he'd met and the guy's girlfriend, and they had another thing, and it was like
Really?
there was like a polythene bag, and
You should see her in drag dressed in her polythene bag. That's a little
But I mean,
weird.
Yoko was also doing the polythene bag.
Yeah,
thing.
they
So,
were.
You know, who knows really?
Maybe
what
it's
about.
probably a mixture of those things. A funky imagery from
It was
John.
considered for the White Album, but
Yeah, considered, but they didn't use it. But they used it. They'd made some use of it here, and I like the way that the guitar line descends and down, 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 and then goes straight into "She Came In Through the Bathroom Window," which to me is a complete song. It doesn't sound like it's just a bit. It's pretty
it
much
was floating around because I have a great couple demo albums, Sweet Apple Tracks. It's all the demos from the Let It Be sessions, and there's a lot of She Came In Through the Bathroom Window on that, as we know that really happened.
Mm-hmm.
That someone went into Paul's house on Cavendish Avenue, and
literally got in through the bathroom window.
They took some things and they put a ladder up there, and then they learned where his key was, and they started things disappearing. But I love what John said, and let's see if I can remember the quote here. John said something like, "That's Paul. He wrote that when we were in New York. Something about Apple, and we first met Linda. Maybe she's the one that came in the window. I don't know. Somebody came in the window."
Somebody came in the window. Who was it? And then and that's covered by.
That's all we are saying from that quote.
And Joe Cocker also recorded this song and had a hit with it. She Came In Through the Bathroom Window, so it became a very popular track.
And Paul had said that he was in a cab and he saw the cabbie's license, and it was Eugene Quits. And so it was. And so I quit the police department.
So I quit the police department and got myself a city job. I like the lyrics in this song.
To me, it's very sexy. The bass playing is amazing. It's
she tried her best to help me, but she could steal, but she could not rob. In other words, he turned to crime. You know, that's the thing. Turned from quit the police department and he became a criminal.
It's very clever.
Yeah, it's clever. And then it kind of ends. Oh yeah. And then starts with that iconic piano going into Golden Slumbers. And Golden Slumbers thematically was actually based on a 17th century poem by Thomas Dekker, which was set to music. And so that particular song, once there was a way to get back home, and just the piano and the starkness of that in Paul's voice, there George Martin just comes in with those strings. Just perfect, and
John was not on this.
John was
in the
not
hospital
on it.
Apparently, and George played bass.
Right, and George playing bass on it again. They're each playing different instruments on it, and George's a capable bass player, so it worked, and it had weight, it had heft. It's one of my favorites to this day. I think it's a beautiful vocal. It's actually kind of hard to sing, unless you're a tenor in Paul's range.
And he wanted it. He wanted a strong vocal. I mean, he sang it with power.
Mm-hmm. Smiles will wake you when you rise. Sleep, pretty darling, do not cry.
He rewrote some of the original lyrics because they were like something like, was it "You Wantons" or something? Something
so it's
to that effect.
It's sung to a child. It's sung to a song, a lullaby. I will sing a lullaby, and it is a lullaby. It's sort of saying, okay, this is almost the end, folks. We're going to be approaching the end of something. And then you have the big brass coming in, announcing "Carry That Weight" with all four Beatles. Very rare. I think it's the last time they all sang together on "Carry That Weight." And people have attributed "Carry That Weight" to being
all
about the Beatles'
issues,
legacy.
The business, yeah.
Well, they thought people afterwards thought it was about the legacy, but no. Well, and you could say that now, but at the time it was about heaviness of the business. And Paul said it was a lot of heaviness, man, a lot of heaviness around in the atmosphere, and that's what he was referring to. And then we have the rock and roll opus. In fact, the last time the Beatles all recorded together in the studio was on the song "The End." And on "The End," I think George Harrison came up with the idea that, why don't we have some guitars? Why don't we have some guitar solos? And they all agreed, yeah, that's a great idea. And then they arranged.
But he was a little apprehensive about that I think that John and Paul were also going to do it. He obviously acquiesced, but I mean,
I never heard that.
I just read that this morning.
I heard that was his. No, I
things.
heard this was his idea. This was George's idea to do the solos. I don't know why he would be apprehensive if he came up with the idea. Maybe he was apprehensive about his playing, but they
recorded from 6 to midnight, and then they
agreed.
practiced.
Well, here's what they do: they agreed that Paul would go first, then George, and then John, and then they practiced
They had 2 bars.
And once they practiced it, like you said, and went through that session, then when it came time to do the take with the backing track, that was done in one take, and to me, that's just remarkable.
And another interesting fact that I read was that this is the one session where John said to Yoko, like, don't come in the studio. We're going to do this. And I think that someone had speculated that it was the musical bonding between brothers, between the boys, of what they used to do, of how they used to play, and feeding off the energy between them.
Mm-hmm. And respecting that. And then after the solos, and it suddenly stops, and you hear the piano riff where Paul does his famous line, "The love you take is equal to the love you make."
Well, first, let's get back to the drum solo.
Oh, let's not forget. That's right, the drum solo.
Because you know what, Ringo, when they were talking about Ringo and getting him into I guess, early into the band or something, it was like how no one liked the drum solos, and that he was a drummer who didn't like doing drum solos. And so here
he said that was garbage. He said that was a ridiculous idea.
They had to persuade him to do it.
George Martin had to persuade him to do it and said, please, go ahead, do this. And they had this ridiculous count, 1, 2, 13 bars or something. But I did it, and I'm glad he did. And he was glad he did it afterwards.
And Jeff Emmerich said that Paul kind of helped him with it, of course.
But you had the tom-toms. What you have on that is you have the first true stereo drums. We're used to having the drums over on one channel, or done in mono. And here's how you can hear the richness of the tom-toms. So, Ringo called this the album of the tom-toms. And he had these new calves, I guess, put in the drums. And the sound is amazing.
What are you saying? New what?
New calves. 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 Like calves.
Skin. You mean talking about the skins? You're
drum skins. He called them talking about drum skins, guys. That's his quote, okay? Go back and read it. That's what it says. That's what he said. And he called them calves. And anyway, long story short, he did the solo. It turned out to be great. And it's the only Ringo drum solo on any Beatles record. And it really just, it is the link that takes you to the guitar solos, right? So
here's the question: if you're in your car and you're listening to it and you hear this, and you have to get somewhere, but you know that the drum solo is coming up, do you leave the car, or are you late and you listen to it?
I'm late and I listen to it.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to stop.
Absolutely.
It's one of the best parts of the record.
Gosh, I know.
I know. And then that beautiful ending, of course, we were just referring to with Paul singing it. And then you hear the orchestra coming in. There's the production piece where George
Paul
Martin
had wanted to write a couplet like Shakespeare.
Right.
Which was his signature saying now in the end. And John had said, well, it just goes to show you that sometimes when he can think when he wants to, or something to that effect.
No, but he praised Paul for being cosmic. Oh, yeah, that's Paul being cosmic, and he agreed with it. And I think they all essentially agreed with the sentiment in those lines. And you had the big majestic ending at the end. So with George Martin's production closing it out, and then the guitar players, and then the harmonies. And that's pretty much was supposed to be the literal end of the album. And then, what about Her Majesty? So I'll just leave it, put it on the floor, throw it away. George Martin says, don't throw anything away. George Martin says, no, don't throw it away.
All the engineers are trained not to do that.
They're trained not to throw things away.
So
he picked it up off the floor, literally. The engineer
attached 20 seconds of leader tape or something, and then had it on there. And so when they pressed a lacquer version of this album, Paul listened to it and he's like, oh, that's a great random accident. Let's keep that.
That's a guy named John Kurtlander. He put it at the end of the tape. He's the one that put it on there. And then the mastering engineer, Malcolm Davies, received that. And then when the Beatles and Paul heard it, he said, oh, another happy accident. And they decided to leave it on there. And that became the beginning of what was later known as the hidden track, because you don't see it on the album cover. Not on the officially acknowledged on the album cover. On the original releases, folks.
And if you listen to the Super Deluxe version, the alternate takes, Paul in succession does 3 versions of it. And I think that they used the third version but it goes to show you how precise and focused and great. It's a great finger-picking song and he's also singing it great. He said it's a little cheeky about the Queen, but I think he wrote it in '68. But it's a fabulous way to close out this album. And we'll quickly, since we're running over, you can't do Abbey Road in less than an hour. Let's just be honest.
Let's be honest. I mean, and there's other songs that were intended to be on
Come
the record.
and Get It. Paul did Come and Get It,
which eventually ended up for Badfinger.
Well, he's purposely did it for them, and the story behind it is I think he told them, record it exactly as I've done it. Don't deviate or anything, but during the recording sessions, like the drummer's changing things, the bass player wants to do something different, and to Paul's credit, he's being he's being patient with them, and then ultimately the patience just kind of ended. It was like, you're just going to do it this way, and it turned
exactly
out to
the
be
way I tell you to do
a
it.
hit for them. I mean, imagine you're telling...
But it was intended for the movie The Magic Christian. It was used in the movie. And actually, I also read that he was going to include this on Abbey Road, or wanted to write it for use on Abbey Road, and then change his mind about it. So they didn't end up not using it. Or nor did he have his own official version come out. We just have that demo of him doing it without any harmony, and you can hear it.
And he played all the instruments, of course.
Of course he does. And then, of course, it's he and John also, during that period, played the Ballad of John and Yoko, which became a single, which was backed by Old Brown Shoe, which you heard me earlier say should have been on the album. But
I love Ballad of John and Yoko.
I love Ballad of John and Yoko because
telling a story. It's a great
story, a true story and straightforward story. And you can hear in the sessions, when you hear the sessions of that John and Paul were getting along fabulously and having a lot of fun and working out the parts.
Teasing each other about...
It's just the two of
Ringo
them.
on the drums.
So Ballad of John Yoko is just John Lennon and Paul McCartney playing everything and singing everything. The other two Beatles are not on that record.
Yeah, I think that they were... I think that Paul was asked, were the other Beatles upset? And he said, well, they may have been, but probably not, because we went into the studio the next couple days and just resumed everything. It's just a matter of who was there, of getting the songs down. And apparently, I think the original title was something about Jesus Christ.
Christ, you know it ain't easy, right?
Jesus Christ, and Paul's like, I don't think that the Jesus Christ thing, that's going to be working out with what happened with, 1966 in your comments. So they changed it to Christ, and then Paul's harmony is on that. The bass is simple. Paul's drumming, the first take that you hear on the Super Deluxe, Paul's drumming he's figuring things out. It's a little
rough.
Yeah, it's a little rough, but he gets it together.
Yeah, and then during those times they were so busy. I mean, Paul actually wrote a song intended for a singer, Mary Hopkin, at the time, who sang famously "Those Were the Days," and produced a song called "Goodbye," one of my very favorite songs by Paul. And there's kind of a very fruity little vocal he does on the 50th Deluxe
high
anniversary.
Register that he was having.
Had it high register, and he sang it and wrote it and changed some of the lyrics. Were changed afterwards for her version, some of them. But it's a great track. What a great song! And that's something that he could have written or played for himself, and gave that one away. And George Harrison had already written "All Things Must Pass," but the Beatles didn't record it. And that was just a very productive. What does this tell you about them? In spite of all the other stuff going on, how productive.
Horrible stuff. I mean,
about
money and loss of money,
things, and yet they got along in the studio. They've managed to pull this off after a rough time on the Get Back Let It Be sessions, which we'll address separately. And then there's all these other things come out of this. The album cover we talked about.
Well, let me just say about what to me is magical about that cover is that the photographer is a guy named Ian, I believe, McMillan, friend of John and Yoko's. And so he came out, and it literally was within 10 minutes, and he stood on a stepladder with his Hasselblad camera.
Yeah.
And he took 6 shots.
Only 6
shots on film. It's not like you're looking through your digital camera, checking it, going, oh, that sucks, let's do it again. 6 shots, and they went in one direction for a few, they went in the other direction, and a couple of them, Paul wore his sandals, and he took them off because it was a warm day. They were dressed in, the John, Paul, and Ringo were wearing their suits that were designed by Tommy Nutter, their tailor. Beautiful suits, beautiful, and Paul's walking barefoot with this cigarette, and it is unbelievable, the composition and the framing of that photograph, the magic that it happened. Talk about serendipity.
Yeah.
The other great thing is Linda was also taking photos that day, and if you Google,
Linda is Paul's first wife, for those who don't remember.
and if you look at her photos, they are so beautiful. She's so underrated as a
great
photographer,
stuff.
and if you just look at them talking to each other, you can see actually in one of the photos her little bag that has LLE, Linda Louise Eastman, like her monogram.
Yeah,
And
what a great talent she had.
just amazing, because some of the photos are just dreadful where they're out of step. That he managed to capture them in step, and then Paul looked at the shots and picked the one for the cover. And Paul had come up, sketched with an idea first,
Right.
and then Ian had something else, and then they took the flip page of the Abbey Road sign, which apparently I think is no longer there. That's been.
And you'll note that on the front album cover, there is no name, no Beatles, no album name. That's on the back, not on the front cover. And of course, the record label was throwing a fit. Well, why don't you put that on there? Because they're the most famous band in the world. Response, it wasn't necessary. And I'm glad, again, the Beatles stuck to their creative guns on this and said, no, we liked it like that. And then the information was on the brick and Abbey Road on the back with the track listings. And of course, I think that poor Billy Preston should have gotten credit on this record as far as on the sleeve or some mention of him because of his great contributions to this record, playing Hammond organ on it. But he
electric organ too.
And electric organ. He was just amazing on it. And
Alan Parsons.
And Alan
was
Parsons
also a part of this, of an engineer on this album.
He was an assistant engineer at the time, and look what he. Of course, for those of you that all know who Alan Parsons is, the Alan Parsons Project produced many great hits in the 70s, 80s, and onward. And then he went on to help score, I believe, Lord of the Flies, or no, what was it?
Rings?
Lord of the Rings. That's it. I keep thinking of Lord of the Flies. But anyway, there's so much to be said. And then there's that great hoax that came off that album cover, which we're going to save for another time.
Overwhelming, because, you look at all these things, the Volkswagen 28 if, and Paul would have been 27, but all these things and all the symbolism. And it's great how they did the orientation of them walking away from Abbey Road, because it is coming again full circle of their life, of the legacy and the music that they created, and walking away from the building. It would have been wrong if they were walking into it. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing during this time frame is they did the pictures of, I call it the Red and Blue album. The Red album where they're up in the building looking down.
An American, compilation release.
Yes,
right.
And then they go up there again for the Blue album during this time frame of how they've changed. So it's magical. And my friends, so we thank you so much for listening today, and we hope you enjoyed it, found something useful or helpful from this podcast, and hope that you enjoy Abbey Road, and leave your comments on our YouTube channel about what you think about Abbey Road. We'd love to hear your impressions and how you respond to it as well. And this podcast is available on iTunes, on Apple, on Amazon, at all typical podcast platforms. Mm-hmm. Yes. So thank you so much, and be well, and we'll see you soon.
All right, we'll see you.